September 7, 2013, Lilongwe, Malawi. A country of 18 million people, most living on less than $1 a day. On this morning, the course of African history was about to change. Police arrived at a modest home in a working-class neighborhood. Inside, not a criminal mastermind, not a cartel boss, not a political kingpin. Instead, a junior government clerk, 23 years old, earning roughly $100 per month. Victor Sithole. His title, accounts assistant. His salary, poverty wages. His discovery, a fortune that would unravel an empire. When officers opened his car trunk, they found something impossible, something that shouldn't exist on his salary. $300,000 in cash, stuffed into plastic bags, hidden in compartments. The amount, 3 times his annual salary, in one location. The question was simple. How? Malawi's government was about to ask itself the same question, and the answer would expose something far darker than anyone imagined. But Victor Sithole's arrest wasn't the beginning of this story. It was the beginning of the end. And what came next would involve violence, betrayal, and a whistleblower who would become the very thing he tried to expose. 3 days after Victor Sithole's arrest, September 13, 2013, something happened that changed everything. Paul Mphwiyo left his home in Area 43, an upscale district of Lilongwe. He was 31 years old, brilliant, an economist, recently appointed by President Joyce Banda as Budget Director at the Ministry of Finance. His job? Find the corruption, close the loopholes, audit the impossible numbers. He'd been asking questions, hard questions. The week before, he'd requested detailed expenditure reports from the Reserve Bank of Malawi. He'd discovered something that made his blood run cold. Thousands of government checks had been issued, but they didn't match what the treasury authorized. The numbers didn't reconcile. Millions, perhaps billions, were missing. Paul Mphwiyo had found the first thread. He was about to pull it. As he walked toward his car that morning, a vehicle pulled up beside him. Armed men emerged. They fired. Once, twice, 3 times. All 3 bullets entered Paul Mphwiyo's head. He should have died. By every medical standard, a man with 3 bullet wounds to the skull does not survive. But Paul Mphwiyo was still breathing. He was rushed to the hospital, and against impossible odds, he survived. The assassination attempt failed. But here's where the story becomes truly sinister. This wasn't a random attack. This wasn't gang violence. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was a deliberate attempt to silence a man who was getting too close to the truth. And the people who ordered it? They were inside the government. They had access to security, they had resources, and they were desperate. Because Paul Mphwiyo had discovered something that would expose the largest corruption scandal in African history. While Paul Mphwiyo recovered in the hospital, bullets still lodged in his skull, Malawi's government was in freefall. President Joyce Banda declared a national emergency. Within weeks, over 70 people were arrested. Government ministers, business executives, civil servants, suspended, charged, interrogated. What had they discovered? An international forensic audit firm, Baker Tilly, was brought in from the United Kingdom. Their mission? Trace the missing money, find the perpetrators, expose the conspiracy. What they found was staggering. In just 6 months, April through September of 2013, at least $32 million had been stolen from Malawi's national treasury. Some estimates suggested over $100 million if the scheme extended back to previous administrations. $32 million in a nation where the average person earns $500 per year. The mechanism was surprisingly simple and devastatingly effective. Malawi's government used a computer system called IFMIS, the Integrated Financial Management Information System. It was supposed to prevent fraud, to automate controls, to make corruption impossible. Instead, corrupt officials weaponized it. Here's how it worked. Government officials and private business people created shell companies, ghost firms that existed only on paper. These companies would then submit invoices to the government, invoices for goods and services that were never supplied. never delivered, never existed. The IFMIS system would generate government checks, real checks, from the real treasury, paid to these fake companies. The checks would be cashed at commercial banks, sometimes before the payments were even verified. Then, and this is the critical part, the conspirators would delete the transactions from IFMIS, erasing the evidence, leaving no audit trail, no record, no proof. The stolen money would then be distributed among the conspirators, laundered through construction companies, hidden in luxury vehicles, deposited in offshore accounts. But here's what nobody expected. The man who ordered the assassination of Paul Mphwiyo, he wasn't trying to hide the money. He was trying to hide something else. He was trying to hide who else was involved, because the conspiracy reached higher than anyone realized. At the center of the Cashgate conspiracy was a businessman named Oswald Lutepo. On the surface, Lutepo seemed like any other Malawian entrepreneur. He had legitimate business interests. He was a recruitment director for the ruling People's Party. He had connections, influence, access. But underneath, he was the architect of a theft operation that would steal over $9 million from his own country. Oswald Lutepo founded a company called International Procurement Services. Its purpose? To supply goods to Malawi's government. Its actual purpose? To submit fake invoices for supplies that never existed. Between April and September of 2013, Lutepo's company submitted invoices totaling over 4.2 billion Malawi kwacha. That's 9.3 million US dollars. For what? Nothing. Not a single item, not a single service. The government paid every invoice, no questions asked. When Oswald Lutepo was finally arrested and charged, he had a defense prepared. It was simple, it was shocking, and it would divide Malawi for years. I was used by politicians, he claimed, particularly President Joyce Banda. She knew about this. She benefited from this. And now she's blaming me to protect herself. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. Was the president of Malawi complicit in the theft? Was she a co-conspirator? Or was Lutepo lying to save himself? The truth, as it turned out, was far more complicated and far more damning. The justice minister transformed from financial crime into something darker, into conspiracy, into violence. Ralph Kasambara was Malawi's justice minister under President Joyce Banda. He was a lawyer, a man of law, a keeper of justice. He was also allegedly the man who ordered the assassination of Paul Mphwiyo. According to court documents and witness testimony, Ralph Kasambara was deeply involved in the Cashgate conspiracy. He was stealing, laundering money, benefiting from the scheme. But he had a problem. Paul Mphwiyo had recovered from his 3 gunshot wounds. He was talking to investigators. He was about to expose everything, including Kasambara's involvement. So Kasambara allegedly did what powerful men do when threatened. He decided to eliminate the threat. He ordered the assassination. The shooting, however, failed. Mphwiyo survived. And worse for Kasambara, the investigation into the assassination attempt led directly back to him. In July of 2016, nearly 3 years after the shooting, Ralph Kasambara was convicted of conspiracy to murder. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison. Think about that. Malawi's justice minister, the nation's highest legal authority, convicted of trying to murder a whistleblower. But here's the twist that makes this story truly shocking. Paul Mphwiyo, the man they tried to kill? The whistleblower who exposed the conspiracy. He would later be accused of being the conspiracy's true architect, of orchestrating the entire scheme, of being not a hero, but a thief disguised as a reformer. And 10 years later, he would disappear from public view entirely, fleeing the country, hiding, running from the very justice system he claimed to champion. 70 arrests. How many convictions? 15, maybe 20. Over a decade, 40 suspects named in audits, never prosecuted, still free, living in Lilongwe, running businesses, collecting government contracts. This is the story of Cashgate's second scandal. Not the theft itself, but the failure of justice that followed. Oswald Lutepo, convicted of money laundering and conspiracy, served his 11-year sentence. He was released in January of 2022. Since then, he's been spotted in luxury vehicles, speaking in whispered circles about his unjust persecution, claiming vindication. Some sources suggest he's been involved in amnesty discussions, informal negotiations that might see Cashgate convictions overturned in exchange for political cooperation. But nothing's confirmed, nothing's documented. It's all shadows and rumors. Ralph Kasambara died in June of 2024. Heart failure, officially. He was 55 years old. Still appealing his conviction, still claiming innocence. But before his death, something extraordinary happened. His legal team alleged that Paul Mphwiyo, the alleged whistleblower, had actually planted evidence, that he'd fabricated financial discrepancies to frame Kasambara, that the entire Cashgate narrative was a political assassination of Kasambara himself. Nobody proved it. The claims remained allegations, accusations in legal filings. But they cast doubt on everything. And then there's Issa Njauju, Director of Corporate Services at Malawi's Anti-Corruption Bureau, a man dedicated to fighting corruption, a man trying to do justice. He was murdered in July of 2015, 2 years into the Cashgate investigation. Shot, killed. The official cause listed as armed robbery. But nobody believed that. Investigators who got too close to Cashgate's upper reaches had a habit of dying or disappearing. Issa Njauju's murder was never solved. His killer was never prosecuted. His death created a chilling message. Get too close to the truth, and you might not survive to tell it. This story is just getting deeper. If this shocks you already, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happens next will challenge everything you thought you understood about justice, corruption, and the price of truth-telling in Africa. June 2023, a Lilongwe courthouse. Paul Mphwiyo, the whistleblower who survived 3 bullets in the skull, was scheduled for a conviction hearing. After 9 years of investigation and trial, he was about to be sentenced, potentially to 10 years or more in prison. He never appeared in court. Paul Mphwiyo fled, skipped bail, disappeared. Some reports suggest he fled the country entirely. Others claim he's hiding within Malawi, protected by sympathetic officials. His whereabouts remain unknown as of today. Let that sink in. The man who claimed to expose Malawi's largest corruption scandal, the budget director who supposedly discovered the theft, the whistleblower who survived an assassination attempt to tell his story. He is now a fugitive from justice, running, hiding, evading the very system he claimed to fight for. Was he running because he was innocent? Because he feared political persecution? Because the system was rigged against him? Or was he running because he was guilty? Because the accusations were true? Because he was, all along, one of the architects of Africa's largest theft? The truth is, nobody knows, and that ambiguity, that uncertainty, is perhaps the most damning indictment of all. This story is just getting deeper. If this shocks you already, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Cashgate scandal revealed something Africa's institutions didn't want revealed: that corruption isn't just about theft. It's about the failure of systems, the capture of justice, the silencing of truth-tellers. And 10 years later, we still don't have answers. When the Cashgate scandal broke, the international community responded swiftly. Donors from Europe, North America, and international institutions suspended $150 million in aid to Malawi. 40% of Malawi's annual budget gone. Healthcare systems collapsed. Schools closed. Pregnant women died in hospitals without medicine. Children went hungry. Infrastructure projects halted. 18 million Malawians paid the price for elite corruption. Here's what the numbers don't capture: the erosion of trust, the death of institutional legitimacy, the realization that the systems supposedly designed to prevent corruption, IFMIS, the Anti-Corruption Bureau, the judiciary, parliament, had all failed. They didn't just fail passively, they were actively corrupted, weaponized, turned into tools of theft instead of tools of justice. The Cashgate scandal exposed a brutal truth. In Africa, corruption isn't a crime committed by individuals acting alone. It's a system, a conspiracy, a network of complicit institutions. From government officials to private business people, from international donors who closed their eyes to warning signs, from civil servants who knew but said nothing, from judges who delayed trials for years, from politicians who used the scandal as a weapon against their enemies while protecting their allies. The theft was $32 million, but the real cost was far higher. The cost of a nation's dignity, a system's credibility, a people's faith in justice. Paul Mphwiyo remains a fugitive. Oswald Lutepo walks free. Ralph Kasambara died before final justice. Issa Njauju was murdered and his killer was never found. 40 suspects were never charged. Over 50 convictions were dispersed unevenly. Some received decades in prison. Others served just years for identical crimes. And Malawi? Malawi is still recovering, still rebuilding, still asking the same question that started this entire investigation. How do we rebuild trust in a system that was designed to betray us? The answer, it seems, remains as elusive as Paul Mphwiyo himself.